The first time Alara noticed the silence, she was folding her husband's socks. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind that bled into all other Tuesdays without distinction, and she sat on the edge of their bed, matching navy blue socks into neat pairs. From the living room came the low murmur of the television, some documentary about deep-sea creatures that Liam had watched a dozen times before. The narrator's voice was calm, measured, describing the bioluminescent glow of angular fish in the perpetual darkness, where no sunlight reached. Alara paused, a sock in each hand, and listened, not to the television, but to the space between them. The apartment was warm, comfortably furnished, filled with the artifacts of a decade together, photographs in simple frames, books they had both read, a vase she had bought at a flea market in Prague on their 5th anniversary. It was a good life, a perfectly respectable, comfortable, enviable life. And yet, in the silence, she heard something else, a faint, persistent hum, like a wire strung too tight, vibrating just below the threshold of conscious thought. She had tried for years to ignore it, to drown it out with busyness and gratitude and the quiet contentment she was supposed to feel. She had told herself repeatedly that this was what love became, not the fever dream of early romance, but a steady, reliable warmth, a partnership, a team. Liam was a good man, kind, dependable, endlessly patient. He remembered to buy her favorite brand of almond milk. He never left the toilet seat up. When her mother was in the hospital 2 years ago, he had taken 3 weeks off work without a single complaint, sleeping on a terrible fold-out chair beside her bed so Alara could go home and shower. He was, by any measurable standard, a wonderful husband. So why did she feel like she was drowning in air? She finished the socks and placed them in the drawer, running her hand over the neat stacks of fabric, everything in its place, everything orderly and correct. She walked into the living room and sat on the sofa beside him, tucking her feet beneath her. He glanced over, smiled briefly, and returned his gaze to the screen, where a giant squid was engaged in a silent, ghostly battle with a sperm whale thousands of feet below the surface. Alara watched the struggle, the desperate, primal fight for survival in a world of absolute dark, and felt a strange, aching envy for the clarity of it. To fight, to want something so badly that you would risk everything. She thought about the email she had received that afternoon, a work thing, ostensibly, a follow-up from a conference she had attended in Chicago 6 months ago. The sender was a man named Julian Cole, a freelance graphic designer she had met at a workshop on brand storytelling. They had exchanged cards, talked for an hour over terrible hotel coffee about the difference between visual identity and genuine narrative, and she had forgotten about him entirely until his name appeared in her inbox. His email was simple, professional. He was going to be in the city for a few days consulting with a mutual acquaintance, and wondered if she would like to grab coffee and continue their conversation. No pressure, just a thought. She had not replied. She had stared at the screen for a full 5 minutes, her finger hovering over the mouse, and then she had minimized the window and gone back to her work, drafting a social media calendar for a client who sold artisanal dog treats. But the email sat there, a small, glowing amber in the corner of her mind. It was not the words themselves. It was the possibility they represented. A crack in the wall. A door she had not known was there, slightly ajar. Over the next few days, she thought about Julian more than she should have. She remembered details she had not consciously registered at the time. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh that seemed to surprise even him. The faint scar on his chin, a white line against his skin. The way he had leaned forward when she spoke. His attention so focused it felt almost like a physical touch. She compared this memory to Liam, who listened with his phone in his hand, occasionally nodding, occasionally saying mum, his attention a river split into too many channels to ever run deep. On Thursday, she replied to the email. Just a brief, friendly note saying that coffee sounded nice and yes, she would be free on Monday afternoon. She hit send before she could change her mind and then sat at her desk, her heart hammering against her ribs as if she had just committed a crime. Perhaps she had. Not yet, not really. But the intention was there, a seed planted in fallow ground. They met at a small cough tucked away on a side street, the kind of place that prided itself on obscure brewing methods and single-origin beans that cost as much as a meal. Alara arrived early, deliberately, to give herself time to leave if the anxiety became too much. She ordered a pour-over and sat at a table by the window, watching the pedestrians pass. She felt like a character in a film, a woman on the precipice of a life-altering decision, and the awareness of it was both terrifying and exhilarating. Julian walked in at exactly 2 o'clock. He spotted her immediately and smiled that crinkle-eyed smile, and something in Alara's chest loosened and tightened at the same time. He was taller than she remembered, dressed in a worn leather jacket and a sweater that looked soft and well-loved. He ordered an espresso and slid into the chair across from her, his presence filling the small space effortlessly. "Alara," he said, and her name sounded different in his mouth. Warmer, more deliberate. "I'm so glad you could make it." The conversation flowed as easily as it had in Chicago, but this time there was an undercurrent, a current of awareness that ran beneath the words. They talked about work, about the challenges of creative fields, about the strange, isolating experience of spending your days crafting messages for products you would never buy. He asked her questions that were not polite or perfunctory. He wanted to know what she believed, what she feared, what she dreamed about when she allowed herself to dream. No one had asked her these things in years, not even herself. 2 hours passed in what felt like minutes. When they finally stepped out of the car, the afternoon light had softened into the pale gold of approaching evening. They stood on the sidewalk, a careful distance between them, and Alara knew that this was the moment where she could smile, say goodbye, and walk away, carrying nothing but the memory of a pleasant afternoon. Or she could stay. "I don't want this to end," Julian said quietly, voicing the thought she had been too afraid to form. "Dinner? Tomorrow night?" She should have said no. Every rational part of her brain screamed it. She was married. She had a good life, a wonderful husband, but the wire in her chest was humming so loudly now it drowned out everything else. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'd like that." The dinner was at a small Italian place with candles on the tables, and a waiter who treated them like old friends. They shared a bottle of wine, and Alara felt the alcohol loosen the last of her reservations. She told him things she had never told anyone, about the loneliness that lived inside her even in a crowded room, about the fear that she had made a terrible mistake at 22, choosing security over passion, and had been paying for it ever since, about the silence in her apartment that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. Julian listened. He did not offer solutions or platitudes. He simply held her gaze and let her speak, and when she finally fell silent, tears pricking at her eyes, he reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was warm, his fingers strong, and the touch sent a shock through her system, a jolt of electricity that woke something she had thought was dead. "I know that silence," he said. "I've lived in it too." Later, standing outside her apartment building, the city humming quietly around them, he kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, a question. She answered by pressing closer, by winding her fingers into his hair, by surrendering to the hunger that had been building for days, for years. When they finally pulled apart, she was trembling. "Come upstairs," she whispered. It was not a question. Liam was away at a conference in Philadelphia. He would not be back until Thursday. The apartment was empty, dark, waiting. She led Julian inside, past the photographs and the books and the vase from Prague, and into the bedroom where she had folded socks just a week ago. She did not think about Liam. She did not think about the life she was betraying. She thought only about the heat of Julian's skin, the urgency of his mouth, the desperate, clawing need to feel alive. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, the city lights painting shifting patterns on the ceiling. Julian slept, his breathing slow and even, one arm thrown across her stomach. Alara stared into the darkness, and the silence returned. But it was different now. It was not empty. It was filled with the weight of what she had done, a presence so heavy it pressed the air from her lungs. She had crossed a line. She had broken something that could never be fully repaired. And the worst part, the part that made her stomach clench with a shame so deep it felt like nausea, was that she did not regret it. Not yet. For the first time in years, she had felt something other than the quiet hum of endurance. She had felt wanted, desired, seen. The affair continued for 6 weeks. They met in hotel rooms in Julian's rented apartment, in stolen afternoons when she was supposed to be at client meetings. Alara became an expert in deception. She learned to lie with a straight face, to craft elaborate stories about work deadlines and last-minute projects, to delete texts and call logs before Liam could see them. The guilt was a constant companion, a dull ache behind her ribs, but it was also a fuel. It made the stolen stolen moments sharper, more precious. She was living a double life, and the danger of it, the sheer audacity, made her feel powerful in a way she had never felt before. With Julian, she was not Liam's wife. She was not the reliable, dependable partner in a perfectly respectable marriage. She was just Alara, passionate, impulsive, alive. They talked about running away together, about quitting their jobs and traveling through Southeast Asia, or moving to a cabin in the woods, or any of the other fantasies that lovers construct to give their affair a future, a shape beyond the furtive present. Alara knew, on some level, that it was fantasy, that the real world, with its mortgages and careers and complicated histories, would eventually reassert itself. But she did not care. The fantasy was enough. It was oxygen. Liam, for his part, seemed oblivious. He continued his routines, his documentaries, his quiet, undemanding presence. He asked about her days, accepted her explanations, and never once looked at her with suspicion. His trust was a gift she accepted and trampled day after day. Sometimes, watching him sleep, she felt a surge of something that might have been hatred, not for him, but for his complacency, for the way his love had become so safe, so unquestioning, that it had left room for someone else to walk in and claim her attention. She told herself that if he had tried harder, paid more attention, been more present, she would not have needed Julian. It was a convenient lie, and she clung to it. But lies have a way of multiplying, of creating their own gravity until they collapse inward. It ended on a Sunday, a raw, gray Sunday in November, the kind of day that feels like the world is holding its breath before the first snow. Liam had gone to the grocery store, a mundane errand he always handled, leaving Alara alone in the apartment. She was in the kitchen, making tea, when she heard his key in the lock. The sound was earlier than expected, and she felt a flicker of irritation at the disruption of her solitude. She pasted on a neutral expression and turned to greet him. He stood in the doorway, holding a single bag of groceries. His face was pale, his eyes empty, and he was looking at her as if he had never seen her before. In his other hand, he held her phone. Alara's blood turned to ice. She remembered, with sickening clarity, that she had been texting Julian that morning. Stupid, careless. She had heard Liam leave, had assumed she had at least an hour, and had let her guard down. The phone must have been on the counter, the screen still lit. "Liam," she said, and her voice was a stranger's, thin, trembling. He did not speak. He walked to the kitchen table and set down the grocery bag, then placed her phone beside it. Face up. On the screen was a message from Julian. "Last night was incredible. I can still feel your hands on me. When can I see you again?" Alara stared at the words, and the world narrowed to a single point. The sound of the refrigerator humming, the drip of the faucet she had meant to fix, the weight of Liam's silence. "I came back because I forgot my wallet," he said, and his voice was flat, mechanical. "I wasn't gone 3 minutes." She opened her mouth to speak, to explain, to lie, but there was nothing left to say. The truth was there on the screen, undeniable. "How long?" he asked. 6 weeks, she whispered. The admission felt like swallowing glass. He nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed something he already suspected. He did not yell. He did not cry. He simply stood there, his hands hanging at his sides, and looked at her with those empty eyes. It was worse than anger. Anger would have been a response, a connection. This was a door closing. "I want you to pack a bag," he said. "Just for a few days. I need you to go." "Liam, please, please don't." His voice cracked just slightly, the first sign of the devastation beneath the surface. "Please don't say anything. Just go." She went. She packed a small bag with shaking hands, throwing in clothes at random, not looking at him, not looking at anything. She walked out of the apartment, past the photographs and the books and the vase from Prague, and closed the door behind her. The sound of it clicking shut was the loudest thing she had ever heard. She went to Julian's apartment. He opened the door in his sweatpants, a coffee mug in his hand, and his face shifted from surprise to concern when he saw her expression. She told him everything. The discovery, Liam's flat voice, the door closing. She told him with the expectation that he would hold her, that he would tell her it was okay, that they had each other now, that this was the beginning of the life they had talked about. Instead, he listened, and his face grew still. When she finished, he set down his coffee mug and ran a hand through his hair. "Alara," he said slowly, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry this happened. I'm sorry too." she said, reaching for him. But maybe it's for the best. Now we don't have to hide. He stepped back just a fraction, but she felt it like a blow. Alara, I didn't promise you anything. The words hung in the air between them, ugly and final. What? She breathed. I care about you, he said, and his voice was gentle, which made it worse. I do. But this, what we had, it was never going to be anything more than this. I thought you understood that. She stared at him, and the world tilted. The fantasy, the beautiful, sustaining fantasy of running away together, of a future, of being seen and chosen, it crumbled to dust. She had been a fool, a pathetic, desperate fool. She had traded her marriage, her home, her entire life, for a man who had never intended to give her anything more than a few weeks of distraction. Get out, she said, her voice low and shaking. Alara, get out of my sight. He left. He walked out of his own apartment, pulling on a jacket as he went, and left her standing in the middle of his living room, surrounded by his things, by the evidence of a life she did not share and never would. She sank to the floor, her back against the sofa, and the tears came. Not the pretty, controlled tears of a sad movie. Ugly, heaving sobs that tore through her chest and left her gasping. She cried for Liam, for the trust she had shattered, for the quiet, good man who had loved her without question and whom she had repaid with betrayal. She cried for herself, for the emptiness inside her that she had tried to fill with a stranger's hands, and that was now emptier than ever. She stayed on that floor for hours until the gray afternoon faded into black night. Eventually, she pulled herself together, washed her face in his bathroom, and walked out. She had nowhere to go. A hotel, she supposed, some anonymous room where she could hide from the wreckage of her life. But as she stepped onto the street, her phone buzzed. A text from Liam. I need to talk to you. Not tonight, but soon. There are things we need to figure out. Please don't disappear. She read the message 3 times, searching for some clue to a state of mind. Anger, sadness, a flicker of hope. There was nothing but the words, flat and practical. Liam, even in devastation, was practical. She checked into a hotel near the airport, a generic place with beige walls and the faint smell of disinfectant. She lay on the bed, fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to think. Really think, not about Julian, not about the affair, but about herself, about the woman she had become. She had told herself a story about a neglected wife, trapped in a passionless marriage, starving for attention. It was a story that justified her choices, that made her the victim and Liam the unwitting villain. But lying there in the sterile hotel room, she saw the truth. Liam had not neglected her. He had trusted her. He had given her space, freedom, the quiet security of unconditional love. And she had mistaken that trust for indifference. She had confused the steady warmth of a hearth for a lack of fire. And she had gone looking for flames elsewhere, not realizing that she was the one who had let the fire go out. She had not asked Liam for more. She had not told him about the silence, about the humming wire, about her fear that she was disappearing into the role of wife. She had simply assumed he would not understand, that he could not give her what she needed, and she had sought it elsewhere without ever giving him the chance. The betrayal was not just the affair. It was the years of silence that preceded it. The choice she had made over and over, to hide herself from the one person who had promised to love all of her. The next morning, she called him. Hi, she said when he answered. Her voice was hoarse from crying. Hi. His voice was careful, guarded. Thank you for texting. For not just shutting me out. A pause. I thought about it. I know. I would have deserved it. Another pause, longer this time. She could hear him breathing. Could picture him standing in their kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, staring out the window at the gray sky. I need to understand, he said finally. Not the details. I don't want the details. But I need to understand why. Was it something I did? Something I didn't do? No. The word came out fierce, absolute. No, Liam. It was not you. It was me. It was all me. I was so lost. I was so afraid of being invisible that I stopped seeing what was right in front of me. I stopped seeing you. I stopped seeing us. And instead of talking to you, instead of fighting for us, I ran. I ran towards someone who made me feel seen for 5 minutes, and I convinced myself that was enough. It wasn't. It was never enough. It was a lie. Silence. She waited, her heart pounding. I don't know if I can forgive you, he said quietly. I don't know if I can ever look at you and not see those words on the screen. I know, she whispered. I know. And I'm not asking you to forgive me. Not now. Not ever if that's what you need. But I am asking, I am begging you, to let me try to explain. To let me tell you the truth, all of it. Not to make excuses. Just so you know. So you understand that it was never about you not being enough. It was about me not being brave enough to be honest. Another long pause. She closed her eyes, waiting for the verdict. Okay, he said. Come home, we'll talk. She went home. Walking back into the apartment was like stepping into a dream she had woken from. Everything was the same. The photographs, the books, the vase from Prague. But everything was different. The air itself felt charged, heavy with the weight of the unspoken. Liam was sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of cold tea in front of him. He looked older, tired. The skin around his eyes was shadowed, and there was a set to his jaw she had never seen before. She sat across from him, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she began. She told him everything. Not the graphic details of the affair, which he had said he did not want, but the story behind it. The silence she had felt for years. The hum of the wire. The fear that she was disappearing. The moment she received Julian's email and the crack it had opened in the wall of her life. The desperate, childish belief that someone else could fill the emptiness she had never learned to name. She talked for over an hour, and Liam listened. He did not interrupt. He did not ask questions. He simply sat, his eyes on her face, and absorbed every word. When she finally fell silent, her throat raw and her eyes dry from crying, he reached across the table and took her hand. It was the same gesture Julian had used in the Italian restaurant, but it was nothing alike. Julian's touch had been a spark, a question, a promise of escape. Liam's touch was an anchor, a declaration, a choice. I'm angry, he said quietly. I'm so angry I can barely breathe. And I'm hurt, deeper than I knew it was possible to be hurt. But I'm also hearing you. For the first time in a long time, I'm really hearing you. And I'm angry at myself too. For not listening sooner. For not asking the right questions. For assuming that because I was content, you were content. It's not your fault, she said. None of this is your fault. Maybe not, but it's our problem. If we're going to fix it, if we're even going to try, it has to be our problem. Together, he squeezed her hand, and she felt the tears threaten again. Not tears of sadness this time, but of something else. Gratitude, maybe, or hope, a fragile, tentative hope that perhaps, against all odds, something could be salvaged from the wreckage. We need help, he said, professional help. A counselor, someone who can teach us how to talk to each other again, how to be honest, how to fight for this if we decide we want to. Do you want to? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the war in his eyes. The love warring with the hurt, the hope struggling against the memory of betrayal. I don't know, he said honestly, but I want to find out. I want to try, and I need you to be patient with me. I need you to understand that trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight. It's going to take time, a lot of time, and there is no guarantee we'll get there. I know, she said, and I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes, for as long as it takes. They started counseling the following week. The sessions were brutal. Alara sat in a cramped office with beige walls and a box of tissues on every surface, and she learned to articulate the emptiness she had never been able to name. She learned that the silence she had felt was not Liam's fault, but her own. She had built walls around herself, walls of self-sufficiency and unspoken expectations, and then she had blamed him for not climbing over them. She had wanted him to read her mind, to intuit her needs without her having to voice them, and when he failed, she had interpreted it as a lack of love. Liam, for his part, learned to express his own pain, the anger that simmered beneath his calm exterior, the humiliation of being deceived, the fear that he would never be able to trust anyone again. He raged in those sessions, sometimes, his voice rising as he described the moment he had seen those words on her phone. And Alara sat and listened, and she did not defend herself. She simply absorbed his pain as he had absorbed her confession, and she let it wash over her. It was the least she could do. Months passed. Winter melted into spring, and the city began to thaw. The photographs in the apartment remained, but they no longer felt like artifacts of a life life that was over. They felt like markers of a journey that was still in progress. Alara and Liam learned to talk again. Really talk. They scheduled weekly check-ins, not as a chore, but as a commitment. They asked each other hard questions. They shared their fears, their doubts, their secret hopes. They learned slowly and painfully to be present for one another. Julian became a distant memory, not forgotten, never forgotten, but relegated to the past where he belonged. Alara thought of him sometimes, not with longing, but with a kind of sad gratitude. He had been a catalyst, however unwitting. He had shattered the illusion of her perfect life and forced her to confront the truth. She did not forgive herself for what she had done, not entirely, but she learned to live with it. She learned to carry the weight of her betrayal without letting it crush her. One evening, nearly a year after that terrible Sunday, Alara and Liam sat on their sofa, watching a documentary about migratory birds. It was not a deep-sea creature feature, but Liam had developed a new appreciation for birds, for the incredible distances they traveled, the obstacles they overcame, to return to the same place year after year. Alara leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and felt the steady rhythm of his breathing. The wire in her chest was gone. In its place was something quieter, deeper, a connection that had been tested by fire and had emerged not unscathed, but stronger. "I love you," she said quietly. He turned his head and kissed her hair. "I love you too." It was not a declaration of triumph. It was a simple statement of fact, offered without expectation. They were not the same people who had folded socks and watched documentaries in oblivious comfort. They were survivors of a disaster of their own making, picking through the rubble and rebuilding, brick by brick, a life that was more honest, more fragile, and infinitely more precious. Alara thought about the woman she had been, the woman who had traded a faithful love for a stranger's empty promise. She did not recognize her anymore. That woman had been lost, afraid, desperate for validation. This woman, the one sitting on the sofa with her head on her husband's shoulder, was not lost. She was found, not in the arms of another man, but in the quiet, difficult work of facing herself. The documentary ended, and the credits rolled. Outside, the city hummed with its usual noise, but inside the apartment, there was only the soft sound of two people breathing together. It was not the silence Alara had once feared. It was a silence filled with presence, with choice, with the knowledge that they were both here, both trying, both committed to the long, uncertain road ahead. And for now, that was enough.